Christy, it's for you. I'm going to remain here, so you will. Thank you. Well, this is our last Sunday of walking in the wilderness in my series that I started, and then my able-bodied colleagues from Alma College valiantly carried on through the wilderness, and I'm back this Sunday to round out our Lenten worship as we enter into Holy Week. And I thought it was fitting that this morning we entertained the possibility that even in a garden we can be lost, alone, and get that wilderness feeling if we aren't able to find that peace of Christ. So this morning also I thought I would give you a moment of history coming up for Holy Week as to why next Sunday by a lot of different churches is called Palm/Passion Sunday. Yeah, Chris is shaking your head, absolutely. And maybe you have experienced that title. And the reason for that is this. That didn't come from first century Christians. First century Christians, the early church, marked and celebrated all of those significant events in their history, particularly of Jesus during Holy Week. And so Palm Sunday was that celebration of Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. Because at that time, that is who he was. He was the king for all people and Gentiles as well. But nonetheless, that Sunday was Sunday. It was probably not Sunday. We don't know that for sure. It was celebrated to honor their king, their Messiah. All right? And then we happened. Not us individually, but as the church grew in number and they became an older church, what happened is they decided that, and particularly in this country, that people came for Palm Sunday and they didn't return until Easter Sunday. Let's think about that. They came to Palm Sunday because they knew what that was about, and then, of course, they came to return to celebrate the resurrection, the fulfillment of the prophecy on Easter Sunday. But they didn't focus on anything in between, which was Maundy Thursday, Good Friday. Some people have two services on Good Friday. Someday we'll get into that. Last year, we did a Good Friday service, which we called Ten and Bread, and did not do a Maundy Thursday service because we didn't think at this time of year there was enough people that would draw together. The same thing happened to all of the Christian churches. They thought, well, okay, if we're not going to have people during the week to walk the rest of the wilderness journey, got it? Then let's read the Passion story right after we celebrate the Palms. And so traditionally, in a lot of churches, at the back of the sanctuary on Palm Sunday, you hear the reading of the Passion by Matthew right after you celebrate. And part of that reason is because we, the Church Universal, wanted to make sure that those who would not participate during the week, right, would at least hear the Passion being read so that when they returned to celebrate the resurrection, they had walked through that journey, at least by reading. I still don't know what I think about that, actually, but it is a practice that still happens. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate the Palms. and Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem with all that that entails, and afterwards. And because we are not going to celebrate Good Friday, but we are celebrating Maundy Thursday, the part that gets skipped over in Maundy Thursday often, besides in the reading, is that generally people don't focus on what happened after the Lord instituted the Lord's Supper. Everybody knows Maundy Thursday is Holy Communion from your past. And so what I chose to do today, that's the long explanation, but you will get this as I go forward, I hope, right? So what I thought I would do this year is, since we have been walking in the wilderness with Jesus, we would look solely this morning at the Garden of Gethsemane and what happens after his friends and he shared a meal like we will, and what happened after he said to them, take this bread or take this drink, and told them, do this in remembrance of me. He then went to the garden. And it may sound peaceful, and let's hear the reading, and then we'll ponder perhaps another way to look at it. The Garden of Gethsemane as also a wilderness place. My reading this morning comes from Matthew 26, and I'll be reading 26 to 36. Jesus prays in Gethsemane. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here a while, I go over there and pray. He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. Grief and anguish came over him, and he said to them, the sorrow in my heart is so great that it almost crushes me. Stay here and keep watch with me. He went on a little farther, threw himself downward on the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, take this cup of suffering from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want. Then he returned to the three disciples and found them asleep. And he said to Peter, how is it that you three were not able to keep watch with me for even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Once more, Jesus went away and prayed, my Father, if this cup of suffering cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done. He returned once more and found the disciples asleep. They could not keep their eyes open. Again, Jesus left them, went away, and the third time saying the same words. Then he returned to the disciples and said, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is come for the Son of Man to be handed over to the power of sinners. Get up. Let's go. Look, here is the man who is betraying me. This is the word of the Lord. Forgive me one moment. As I began to read, study, and write, I found myself coming back to a sermon written in 1957, according to Stanford University MLK Institute for Research and Education. Yes, it was written and delivered at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church by Martin Luther King. After reading and reflecting on his words, nothing I could say would come close to King's words. So let's enter the garden and Jesus' wilderness journey with Dr. King as our guide. I've edited this for time and consistency, and I'll have Christy put the entire version for those of you who would like to read the entire sermon online later this week. There's hardly anyone here this morning who has not at some time been pushed to the rugged edges of life. There have been times of fear. There have been some who have felt a cloud of despair that had come to blot out the joyous glitter of a distant star of hope. So often we have been left standing amid surging murmurs of life's restless sea. We have been frustrated and disillusioned, bewildered, and on the brink of despair. There have been times we felt like giving up. We felt that we couldn't make it any longer. This has been an experience characterizing the lives of men and women in all generations. For instance, we turn back the pages of the Old Testament and we hear an earnest believer like Isaiah in the midst of the Babylonian exile crying, "Verily, thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel." We can turn to a noble writer and literary genius like Shakespeare and hear him crying through the lips of Macbeth, that life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. We can hear that noble Negro poet in the midst of the streak of his poetic genius crying about life. A crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile and an hour to weep in, a pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double, and that's life. I would like to take your minds back across the centuries this morning to our Lord and Master, and at least demonstrate the fact that every time Jesus confronted this experience when life was pushed out to those rugged edges, when the deep cloud of despair surrounded him at every point, he had lived about 32 years. And he had gone around doing good, healing the sick, feeding the poor, preaching the gospel to the captives. And in the midst of all that, he was coming to a point that men wanted to get rid of him. We can see him on a day when he was getting ready to go to Jerusalem, the holy city. Jerusalem was the center of Palestine at that time. It was the center of the religious world. And now, at the culmination of his ministry, he prepares to go to Jerusalem. And we can see the crowds as they greet him. He is entering Jerusalem now, the triumphant entry. And we can hear them as they cry, and cry their loud hosannas. This is Palm Sunday, you see. This is the day that people praise Jesus. This is the day that people talk about the good things he's done. This is the day for loud and vociferous hosannas. But Jesus knew that this was just the beginning of that week. He knew that before the week was over, he would move from loud hosannas to the dark and deep voice of "Crucify him." He knew that before the week was over, he would move from the high mountain of praise to the deep valley of condemnation. He knew that before the week was over, that glorious sunrise that had characterized his Palm Sunday would be transformed into a dark sunset that would bring in Good Friday. He knew that, so he prepared himself for it. And it is an interesting thing that Jesus was aware of the fact that this was ahead, and he set out and he went on. He didn't stop. He knew that this would come. He knew that this would come through his Jerusalem experience, but he went on. The Bible tells us that just before facing the darkest moment of his life, before facing Good Friday, he went out and decided to talk with God. And it is standing there with all its glaring dimensions. It stands there in the form of the Gethsemane garden. And when he came to this point, Jesus realized in this place, this garden, that he had to face death. When he realized that there were those around who would seek to destroy him and take his life, he went to pray. Well, he took some of his friends with him, and we can see him as he prepares to go into that garden, and he says to his friends, "Watch and wait while I pray." And he went into the garden to pray, and he came back the first time and discovered that his friends were sleeping. This is the mystery and the strange thing of life, that when we come to difficult moments of life, we always have to face it alone. One preacher preached a sermon on this very text, and he called it the loneliness of Christ. And isn't this the true picture of life? That the time we need our friends most, that is the time they seem so unconcerned and so apathetic. Even at our best, friends misunderstand us. And when we come to the moment we need them the most, we find them asleep. That seems to be the long commentary of life. He had to confront this alone. Oh, it is true that many of the experiences of life, our friends, do help us, and they give us kind and consoling words. The story comes down from the late Dr. George Truett of Texas, that a big fire broke out in this very small town in a hotel in this southern city. And in the midst of the fire, fire engines came from all over. And it became so extensive that even other cities had to call in the fire engines. And they did their best. And indeed, they got the fire to go out. It at least had been under control and was smoking. They were getting their trucks ready to drive off. And just at that moment, they heard a little voice screaming at the top of its lungs. And at that moment, everybody stopped, wondering where the voice was coming from. And as it went on, they looked up maybe 15 stories, and they saw at the top of the hotel the face of a little white girl on the very top floor. And immediately, the fire chief called the workers back. And then he called for the youngest, bravest firefighter to go up the ladder and risk his life to save that little girl. Well, the fireman took the challenge, and he climbed that ladder, and he got up to the top, and he put out his arms and indeed took the little girl in his arms. He held her tight as he started to descend the ladder. He got about down halfway, and he froze. He was stuck. As he descended the ladder, everything seemed right. But until he got halfway down, at that moment, the fire started to rekindle, and it broke out again. And the young, brave fireman lost his courage. He lost his strength, and he began to falter. The fire chief yelled out in the loudest voice that he had to the crowd that had now gathered, "Cheer him on! Everybody cheer him on!" And they stood up and cheered. They stood up and seemed to encourage him. "You can do it! Keep going!" As the fireman heard those words, his body seemed to relax. Something changed, and he seemed to regain his strength. As a result of the support, he and the little girl made it down the ladder and to safety. Oh, my friends, so often in life we come to tragic experiences. The cheers and encouraging words of our friends and loved ones do help us on. We are able to regain our courage and to regain our strength and to regain our power because of the cheers of our friends. But we can't always depend on that. Suppose Jesus had depended on that. He would have never made it through. Did not his friend Peter deny him? Did not his friend Judas betray him? Did not his other friends run back to Galilee? When Jesus had to stand amid the darkness of Pilate's judgment, there were no cheers. When Jesus had to confront the darkness of the cross, there were no cheers. When Jesus had to stand amid Golgotha's hill, there were not one cheer. He had to face it all alone. And this is the tragic picture of life, that at our darkest moments, our friends often go to sleep. The time that we need them most is the time that we don't find them. Oh, friends, our friends are often with us in our days of triumph. They're always with us on our days of victory, in our days of popularity. But so often our friends leave us standing alone when we stand in the midst of defeat. So often friends leave us standing and not doing things with the strength and the courage that they have. So Jesus confronted the long story of history, that when we come to the darkest moments of life, we come to the crisis situations of life, we have to stand alone. For even our best friends are often apathetic and unconcerned. Even our best friends leave us at the moment we need them most. So he faced his experience. He went there saying, "Father, if thy be willing, let this cup pass from me." Jesus didn't want to die. Now, maybe you misinterpreted Scripture if you think Jesus wanted to die. As some fundamentalists would say, Jesus came in the world knowing that he was going to die, that he desired to die. But that's not true. According to Scripture, it says in glaring terms that Jesus didn't want to die. "Father, if this is thy will, let this cup pass from me." In other words, "Father, keep me from dying. Keep this bitter experience from coming to me." And that was altogether a human experience. We have often projected Jesus so far into the divine realm that we've forgotten about his humanity. Jesus not only experienced the glow of the divine, but also the tang of the human. And Jesus there, with his human nature, cries out, "Save me I don't want to die. Take this cup from me. There's nothing abnormal about that. That's altogether human. No young, normal human being wants to die. No normal human being wants to face disappointments in life. Philosophers have told us throughout generations that there is something of a surge and a quest for happiness and to avoid pain on the part of human nature. All human beings have a desire to fulfill life through the pleasure of happiness rather than pain. That's natural. That's normal. Yes, there is a person facing some disease. And it's altogether normal and natural for that person in the midst of agony to cry out, God, let this bitter cup pass from me. There's a mother whose son is getting ready to go off to war, whose son is getting ready to be taken away to the far-flung battlefields of the world, and that mother has to face the possibility that the son is never coming back. And that's altogether normal and natural for that mother to pray to God and say, God, let this cup pass. Yes, there is a young lady who always had the desire for life and all of its beauty fulfilling itself in marriage, with all of the beauty that goes along with it. And here she comes to an age that it seems that the opportunity will not come. It's altogether natural for that young lady to cry out, God, let this cup pass. Here's a beautiful couple, married and always brought up with the longings and the aspirations of beautiful and noble children. It seems that because of biological difficulties, it isn't working out. It's altogether normal for that couple to cry to God, let this cup pass from me, O God. How much I desire children. There is nothing abnormal about that. There is nothing unnatural for men and women in the darkest moments of their life to cry out, let this cup pass from me. And here we find Jesus in the midst of his humanity, in the midst of his naturalness, crying out, please, God, let this cup pass. I don't want this disappointment. I don't want to die. Let it pass. But it didn't stop there. There was something after that. We read that nevertheless, yes, nevertheless, and after that nevertheless, he said, I'm sorry, I want to go back and get this right. Nevertheless is the essence of religion. After that, nevertheless, is the ultimate test of one's devotion to God. After that, nevertheless, is the ultimate test of one's character. After that, nevertheless, is the ultimate test of one's loyalty. Let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. And this, you see, is the central test of the individual's life. How one moves out from that, take this cup, to nevertheless. This is what determines your life. This determines how you will live it. This is the great transition, and this is the test of an individual's life lesson. And we must learn this rigorous test of moving from let this cup pass to nevertheless, and few people learn that lesson. They end up in all the misery and all the agony and all the frustration of life because they can't quite jump from one to the other. They end up living on, let this cup pass from me. Take this away, God. And then they try to see that then they see the cup is still there, and they try to run from it through all kinds of methods and manners. And in the end, they end up even more frustrated. Take it away, but no, you have to face the responsibilities of life. Escaping only leads to more sorrow. We must make the transition from the cup to nevertheless, thy will be done. This is what Jesus was able to do, and this is the lesson that he presents to us today. Jesus did this simply through a positive and constructive and abiding faith in God. And so this morning, I don't know about you, but I'm going away determined that whatever he leads me, wherever he leads me, I will follow. I will follow him to the garden. I will follow him to the cross if he wants to go there. I will follow him to the dark valleys of death if he wants to go there. Not my will, but thy will be done. And when you cry that, you stand amid life with exuberant joy, and you know that God walks with you. Even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you know that God is there. Even though you stand amid the giant shadows of disappointment, you don't despair because you know God is with you. Father, let this cup pass from me. It's dark down here. Tired sometimes, disappointing experiences all around. Sickness, facing the death of loved ones, facing disappointment. Somehow you've given us a way to live when we say, thy will be done. We remain stable amid the storm. There is an equilibrium that comes. And the will of others who fall down around you, even perhaps suicide and even death, because of God and your obedience to following him, we keep going and keep singing, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Go forth in the knowing that God's will be done through your acknowledgement and willingness to follow wherever he leads. Amen. At this time, it's our offering meditation, and this morning Pat's going to join us again for our meditation and provide some thoughtful music. And I've lost anything. And we invite you to remember that in the winter, our population is less, and so we always seem to fall behind in the winter. And indeed, we're at that place, but with our faith and trust in God, and when our snow people return, we generally catch up a little bit, but we have our treasure chest at the back. We invite you either coming in or going out to put your offerings in there so that we can continue to be bringing you the words of Jesus Christ.